When life happens, plans need to change. Shaping Change, hosted by certified financial planner Ross Marino, is dedicated to helping financial advisors better serve their clients when life takes those unexpected turns.
Welcome to the Shaping Change podcast. Today, I am joined by Joy Kirsch with Merit Financial Advisors. Hello, Joy.
Good morning.
I love your title, so I didn't want to just gloss over it when I introduced you. It is, I'm just going to go out and say it, my favorite title of all time. You are the CFO of life-changing events. I just love that. How did you come up with that?
I just wanted to succinctly say what I do for my clients, and I felt like it was a great summary of that. Always hard to get through the compliance department if it's a little different, but it's approved, and I think it is a great way to describe to clients what we do for them.
So your practice is in Southlake, Texas, but you're not always working in Southlake, Texas, especially in the near future. So what's going on in the virtual world?
I'm coming to you live from San Diego, California, where it is not 100 degrees and very humid, but exactly the opposite. It's in the 70s. It's been beautiful. And I think that's one of the things I want to keep from COVID. And there are several things that I want to keep from COVID, but one of them is the recognition that we can live our best lives. We can model that for our clients. And I am working from San Diego for the month, and then moving to Colorado in August. So I will be back in Southlake, Texas in September.
The pivot to virtual definitely has some pluses. And I know I see it differently. A lot of people see it differently. I've actually pivoted my practice to where I just say we're a Zoom practice and all our meetings are Zoom. And if a client has to come in or if they have to do a phone call, obviously we'll accommodate, but I'm just making an assumption at this point. We're doing Zoom because I think it's great. I didn't think about actually being able to go to different cities and hang out and work. That's really cool.
Well, come on out to California because, they just love having Texans out here, as you can imagine. They think we're the crazy drivers, but when you live in Texas, they are the crazy drivers.
Well, for someone who doesn't live in Texas, I think there's a long list of things we think about people from Texas, but it's a colorful place to be sure. Well, let's go into your story. So you didn't wake up 30 years ago and say, I'm going to be the CFO of life-changing events. You're a financial planner, you're a practitioner, you have a lot of training, but you also have a story that led to where you are today and how you're in a position to help particular types of clients. Could you share some of your story?
Oh, thank you, Ross. I'd love to. I mean, this has all evolved for me very naturally because I was widowed when I was 30, and that's an unusual experience for a 30-year-old. And I was already a financial planner. I worked with widows. I knew and understood the technical side of widowhood. But going through that experience myself, I recognized that there was something definitely missing in my practice and in my skill and in my craft, because my personal experience was very different from the technical side. It was a very emotional experience, and that grief really changed who I was, not just in the moment, but as a person. And it certainly shaped my practice. But as I came through that process and I wanted to understand what was happening to me and why I couldn't make decisions like I was normally accustomed to making, I really wanted to do some research and understand the personal side of the story, because that drives the technical side. And I was very lucky in that my timing was about the same time that behavioral finance was becoming a thing. And now, of course, it's a huge thing, but I was also very lucky that I found the Sudden Money Institute, and I've become a student there. And that's really helped shape my practice and my craft and the way I present financial planning to widows or anyone going through a life-changing event.
When we hear the words life-changing event, from an observation standpoint, it's easy to see how an event really changes someone's life. But it's hard for us, I think, to understand as planners or even just as people to understand how much we evolve, which you just mentioned on the inside, and how much we change. And I know as humans, it's hard for us to project how we're going to grow, how we're going to mature, what I'm going to think and feel 5 years from now. That's hard or next to impossible under normal circumstances, other than the values that I hold. But when you go through something like becoming a widow, it is truly a game changer. It is a life-changing event. And as financial planners, we can't just approach a widow and say, well, we know this is a rough time and they're going to be overwhelmed, and have some basic understanding. You have to approach the financial planning process differently. So could you give us some insight into how you do that?
Sure. I think it is very different for a widow. And you're right, Ross. Any major life-changing event is going to change us physically, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, socially. Our group of friends is going to change. And so naturally, our financial plan has to change too. But this is a process. It doesn't happen the day we lose our spouse. All these changes don't suddenly happen. And so we can create this new financial plan that reflects that new need, because that need is evolving. And quite frankly, she doesn't know who she's going to be 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 2 years from now. And what we come to learn about these life-changing events is that they take a lot longer than we think they should, that society thinks that they should. And so one of the things that I find with widows is that she's been, her whole life has been disrupted. And so she's looking to have a little bit of control over what she can still control. And one of those is the money. And so often, even though we as planners know she's not going to need as much cash flow, for example, as she needed when she was part of a couple, there is this sense of security that she gets from recreating that status quo. And so often what we try and do at the very beginning, if she's a new widow, is just help her to understand what her cash flow was before, and if possible, how she can recreate that immediately for that sense of security. I know that typically it's not going to be something she has to support on an ongoing basis, and she won't need to, but immediately she likes to have that sense of security that she can recreate what she knew. So plan on doing more than one financial plan for a widow. She wants everything as it was to start with often, but then down the road, as she becomes more important, as she evolves, you can do a new financial planner for her that reflects her new goals and looks more like her as she is today.
That's really good insight for me on how they're going to try to control what they can control because they've lost so much. And it's normal for people to want to hang on to, what do I want to protect? One of the three main questions we ask when we go through a transition. And with the widows, it sounds like they're really going to try to hold on to their previous lifestyle. But you have to go into the financial planning process knowing that there's going to be multiple financial plans or course adjustments along the way. How do you determine when to share that with a widow? Do you say up front, this is just what we're doing now, but everything's going to change, or things may look or feel differently down the road? It's obviously you don't want to put too much on a widow because we know it's going to change, but you certainly want to make sure they understand this is a process. How do you approach that? That's a tough conversation.
Yeah, it is. And I really try to understand her communication preference. But one of the most important things I do in the planning process is that little acronym of WAIT, which is why am I talking?
Love it.
I remind myself that all the time with widows. Why am I talking? I want to let her do the talking. You know, you talk about what do you want to protect? Well, she wants to protect her marriage and she can't, right? What do you want to let go? She doesn't want to let go of her past, and yet she's going to have to. And so I don't try and throw a lot at her in terms of, look, this is how you feel now. This is not how you're going to feel 6 months from now. I want to totally respect how she feels now and meet her in that moment. So I don't try and tell her, look, it's going to look different 6 months from now, because I don't know what that time frame is going to be for her. It might be 3 months from now. It might be 2 years from now. I let her drive the process. But as planners, as people who give advice for a living, I think that's one of the hardest things we do is stop giving advice and just let her drive the process and meet her where she is. Build that circle around her to protect her and stay ahead of her in the process, but just meet her in the moment and let her drive the timing of how it progresses.
I've integrated 2 questions into, I guess we would call it my onboarding process if someone calls in. And the 2 questions are, what are you thinking and how are you feeling? And what I think has surprised me, and I want to know how this applies to your world with the widows, is when someone calls in and tells us their story, I start connecting dots in my brain. And because I've been doing this for 30 years, obviously I have an idea what they're thinking and how they're feeling. And then of course they start talking. And my joke in my own brain is #clueless, right? Don't make any assumptions there. Welcome to 30 years as a financial planner, #clueless, because you think they're going to say X, and there may be similarities with clients, but I'm always amazed, maybe not always, yeah, pretty much always amazed how unique each person is on how they think and how they feel. And widows, they've gone through a similar experience. Do you find many areas that are similar, or is each case really unique?
That is something that widows really hang on to, which is their uniqueness. I think that society likes to put grief in this one nice little box and say we all grieve, whether we're going through a divorce or widowhood, it all looks the same. And certainly, as you mentioned, Ross, there are similarities, but everyone's journey is their own journey. And that to me is what makes our job so interesting. And I love the #clueless. She will probably tell you 6 months from now that she was clueless too, but we are certainly clueless about what's going on in someone else's head. And you bring up the importance of asking those questions and letting her tell her story, because truly we want her to drive the process. And the only way we can allow her to do that is by asking the questions and then being quiet and listening for the answers.
So you're saying I have to listen instead of trying to fix it immediately, right?
Hard to do, isn't it?
It is a tough one. I love W.A.I.T. I had it on, and W.A.I.T, W-A.I.T, why am I talking? I had it on a Post-it note for many, many months and put it up there. And the Post-it note eventually fell off, and I need to put it back up because I have to remember that. That is tough to do. Now, in your notes, you talked about something related to active listening, and it was one of the nuggets I highlighted. It's I think a great takeaway. And you talked about the importance of repeating back what someone says, which is in contrast to kind of paraphrasing. And I want you to talk a little bit about that. And I have to tell you, on the humor side, when I read that, I've been married for 30 years. And I remember repeating back to my wife of, this is what I heard you say. And I would paraphrase pretty much wrong 100% of the time. Right, because what we think in our head, it's never going to be spot on. So I know that listening and then repeating back word for word, I've learned personally how important that is to understand. But you actually bring that into the planning process. Can you talk about why that's so important and how you do it?
I love that you bring that up, Ross, because paraphrasing is something I naturally did because I believed in my head that I could say it better than you did. It's not that I didn't hear what you said, but here, yes. I know this is what you said, but this is what you really meant, right?
Right.
And no, that's not what they really meant. And so we cannot paraphrase. We have to repeat back their words. And even if it's bad English or something that just doesn't sound right, you have to repeat back their words. Now they may catch it and say, oh, that's not what I meant. I really meant this. But that it's really hard to repeat back in someone's exact words. And yet that is how they feel heard. And that is so important to the widow, is to feel heard. I think that's a human condition, but certainly something we need to get into the planning process, to hear our clients. And only then can we help them resolve their issues. And I think that's another important thing that I've learned to ask of the widow. Sometimes when she's telling a story, I try and say, okay, here's what I heard you say. Do you just want me to listen today? Or do you want to talk about some possible solutions? Because sometimes we try and solve problems when really they just want to be heard. It's a delicate little dance, but it is the art of our craft.
You have a quote on your website that says, "I was slowing my recovery by ignoring the emotional side of my grief." Can you talk about that?
I think if I could put widows in two boxes, which is always dangerous, hashtag clueless, we have our widows who are our ostriches, and then we have the widows who are the roadrunners. So I was a roadrunner. I had this list of items, all those technical items that I wanted to get through the list because I wanted to stop being a widow. I wanted to get on with my life. I wanted to get past this pain. But we all know that if we sweep it under the rug, it's just going to come up later. And so we have to address the personal side while we're addressing the technical side. And that's one of the issues that you'll face with your roadrunners, is that they want to check the boxes. And often they're not engaged in the process because they're not doing the hard work, which is the personal work. So watch out for them in that aspect, because 6 months from now or a year from now, they might come back and say, that's not what I understood that happened in this process. That's not what I understand was going to happen. That's not what I understood that I did. So that's one of the issues with the ostrich, with the roadrunners, excuse me. And then the ostrich is equally complex in that she often has trouble just getting out of bed, much less addressing things on the checklist. And with her, you often have to set smaller goals towards the larger goal and have her commit to that one next step that will move her forward in the process. They're challenging, often more so than someone who's not going through a major life-changing event. I mean, retirement is a life-changing event, but it doesn't often have, sometimes it can, but often it doesn't have the emotional grief attached to the loss of a spouse. And so it's a different type of planning. It takes a little more time.
So you mentioned those are the two archetypes, and archetype is a word for typical example. And I say that because I looked it up because you mentioned it and wanted to make sure, and I did the pronunciation on Google. So I like sounding smart. So I make sure I looked up archetype. It's my big word for the day. And you said it's the roadrunner and it's the ostrich, and it makes me think of fight or flight, right? The fight is the roadrunner. You know, let's hit this. The ostrich is the flight. I'm going to just stay in bed today. Do you see people going back and forth between the two, or is there a primary tendency for how just some people work their way through grief?
Now that's a good question. I mean, it's not a linear process for sure. And I think that, yes, even the roadrunner can exhaust herself and need to stay in bed. And in sudden money language, we talk about stuck versus resting, right? So the ostrich, if to the extreme, will get stuck, right, where she's not moving forward, versus resting, which is a very positive and productive thing. And we have to figure out how to define what a rest looks like and help our client define that for herself, so that she'll know when it's time for her to move forward in the process versus when it's time just to take that productive and healing rest.
So I know I may have a tendency to fix, because as financial planners, that's what we like to do. We like to bring solutions. And remembering wait, why am I talking? That's a good reminder because that's a don't do. I don't want to keep talking. I don't want to push ahead. I don't want to offer solutions if the time isn't right for a solution. Any other don't do tips for financial planners?
I think there are a lot of don't do's. Don't avoid talking about her late husband. So many of us are afraid of going there because it might make her upset. And in fact, it might make her upset, or it might bring up some painful emotions. But we know that tears are actually his, they are physiologically, that's a hard word for me to say this morning,
Big one.
healing. Yeah, physiologically healing, right? So we can't be afraid of the tears, and we can't be afraid to talk about her late husband. And in fact, I'd like to even address that when we see that she's moving on and that she's progressing, I think it's really important for us as planners to still recognize and observe those special days that she will still be thinking about him on their wedding anniversary, right? We think about the date of his death, which is an important one to observe, but what about their wedding anniversary? No one's celebrating that with her anymore, and yet she's thinking about that a lot. His birthday. So I think as planners, we're pretty good about sending a card or saying something on her birthday, but she's also thinking about him on his birthday. So these are some of the things we can do versus the don'ts of, don't avoid talking about him, and don't be afraid of the tears. That would be the other thing that I would say. And don't try and stop her when she's crying. Have that box of Kleenex in your office.
We do.
Have it close where she can see it, but don't feel the need to shove it over to her. Let her grab it when she's ready for it. Because what we don't want her to believe is that our office is not a safe place for her to cry.
I think one of the challenges with that, and I remember learning this myself, about you have to bring it up, and it's okay to talk about your late husband, talk about positive things, talk about events or days. It's okay to talk about that. And yes, it does bring in tears, but I found the challenge is that when they started crying, I started crying too.
Yeah.
So I wasn't just afraid of their tears, I was afraid of mine, because it would throw me off track as well, because it's a gut-wrenching, agonizing thing to go through. And if you're sitting across the table with someone that you know and you're connected with, that's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah, that box of Kleenex is not just for her, right? I think the most important thing we can do with our clients is show them our vulnerability, show them our humanness. And that is part of that connectedness that really builds a relationship. So the thing that we are most afraid of is the thing that builds our bond with the clients more than ever.
So you took this experience, you applied it to being a financial planner, you made it a specialty, you're making an impact in the world with your clients, but it doesn't stop there. You also have a nonprofit that really reaches out in this area. Can you share a little about that?
Well, of course I can. I love to share about the widow's journey. So for me, what I discovered is that hour-and-a-half meeting with my widows just wasn't enough. She needs so much support beyond what I could do for her in the time that we had together. And so I was thinking about what in our community offered her that kind of support, and there wasn't anything in our community. We had great grief support programs through churches, through therapy groups, but for me personally, that was an 8-week program, and I came out of that and I thought, well, that was good and that was helpful, but what's next? I'm not healed after this 8-week period. And I looked around and there wasn't a what's next. And so, they say you need to be the change you want to see in the world. And so 10 years ago, I started my own nonprofit, The Widow's Journey, We have been meeting monthly for the last 10 years. During the school year, we bring in a speaker who might help them with a technical topic, such as investing or financial planning or putting together your wills, or how do you file a tax return as a single person versus married filing jointly. And then we bring in the personal side. We might have a nutritionist come in and talk about how to take care of herself. That way, we talk about cooking for one person versus cooking for two. We talk about how do you get a massage and why it's important to have human touch now that you no longer have that in your life. So we do that monthly throughout the school year. And then we also have social events so that we can get her back into society, get her comfortable eating out so that she's not always doing it alone. The objective of the Widow's Journey is threefold. We want to bring her resources from the community that can help her on her journey. We want to educate her about what's going to happen. And most importantly, we want to provide that peer support. So we have these other widows, of course, who are the best resource for each other. So even when we have a technical speaker, we always go to a small group discussion. And it is in that small group discussion that these pearls of wisdom, these little nuggets come out that are so beneficial. It's just a way to have additional support for her beyond what I can do for her professionally. And as is true of so many things in life, what you give, you get back so much. And these women have been such a wonderful part of my life, and to be part of their journeys and see them literally transform from these broken women, these sad women, into these beautiful butterflies. It's a blessing for me to be part of that experience.
And that is awesome. Well, what you've done is fantastic. I know you're in multiple cities already. We'll make sure we include the web address for the Widow's Journey. If other people want to reach out, find out about it. So let's pivot to our last question. You know what it is? It's the magic wand. And if you could wave it, Joy, change anything in the world, what would you do?
I love this question. It's been so much fodder for great discussion with people around me, because now I get to ask it of them as well. And it's an impossible question to answer, Ross. But I think for me, I would say I would want us all to remember that we all were created from the same stardust, that we are all one. And when we remember that we are all one, we recognize that the things we do don't just affect us, but they affect the whole. And we're all working towards that same goal of health and happiness. And when we remember we're all one, that all just works out beautifully.
That is awesome. Joy Kirsch, thanks so much for being on the show today.
It's a pleasure, Ross. Be well.
Thank you for listening to Shaping Change with Ross Marino. This show is for general information purposes only and is not intended to provide recommendations or advice. Speak with a legal, tax, or financial advisor before making any decisions. Past performance references are historical and do not guarantee future results. Visit rlsummit.com to learn more. Securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advice offered through Merit Financial Group, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Merit Financial Group, LLC, Merit Financial Advisors, The Widow's Journey, Ross Marino, and Shaping Change, and LPL Financial are separate entities.